The clock on the wall of Bayside Naval Hospital showed 2:17 a.m. Karen Miller rubbed her tired eyes and took another sip of her coffee. It was her third night shift in a row. The emergency room had been quiet for the past hour, which was unusual, but welcome. Karen had used the time to catch up on patient charts and prepare supplies for what might come later. Karen was 32 years old and had worked as a nurse at this hospital for 5 years. Before that, she had served as a combat medic in the Army for 6 years. Her military experience had made her confident and quick-thinking in emergencies, sometimes too confident, according to her boss, Dr. Susan White, who often reminded Karen to follow protocol. Karen's phone buzzed with a text from her co-worker, Liz. Heard the radio, multiple injuries coming in, training accident, ETA 10 minutes. Karen immediately alerted the on-call doctor, Dr. Alan Grant, and began preparing the trauma rooms. She moved with practiced efficiency, knowing exactly what would be needed. The quiet of the night suddenly transformed into focused activity as other staff members arrived to help. The ambulances arrived with sirens blaring. Karen stood at the entrance as the doors swung open. Paramedics rushed in with the first stretcher. Marine male, 28, severe internal bleeding from crush injury. BP dropping, pulse weak and rapid, the paramedic reported. Karen helped guide the stretcher to Trauma Room 1. The Marine's face was pale, his breathing shallow. His name tag read, Davis Paul Sargent. Karen noticed the Marine had a tattoo of his unit's emblem on his arm. He was part of an elite special operations team. Dr. Grant arrived and began examining Sergeant Davis. We need blood now, he ordered. Karen was already hanging the first unit. The room filled with the beeping of monitors and the urgent voices of the medical team. More injured Marines arrived. The night shift was now overwhelmed with 6 serious cases. Dr. Grant moved between rooms, leaving Karen to monitor Sergeant Davis while he checked on other patients. Karen watched the Marine's vital signs with growing concern. His blood pressure continued to drop despite the transfusion. Something wasn't right. She examined his abdomen again and noticed increased swelling on his right side that hadn't been there minutes before. Dr. Grant, she called out. But the doctor was in another room dealing with a Marine who had stopped breathing. Karen knew, from her combat experience, that Sergeant Davis was likely bleeding into his abdominal cavity. Without immediate intervention, he would die. The protocol was clear. Wait for the doctor. But Karen also knew that waiting even 5 minutes might be too long. She made a quick decision and reached for the ultrasound machine. Her hands moved, with certainty as she confirmed what she suspected, a massive collection of blood in his abdomen. The bleeding was getting worse. Karen called for the surgical tray. The nurse assisting her looked uncertain. Shouldn't we wait for Dr. Grant? She asked. He'll die if we wait, Karen said simply, already preparing the area for the procedure. Karen had assisted with this emergency procedure dozens of times in combat situations and had performed it herself twice when no doctor was available. It wasn't technically within her hospital job description, but it was within her training and experience. Her hands worked steadily as she made a small incision and inserted a drainage tube. Dark blood immediately flowed out, relieving the pressure on Sergeant Davis's organs. His vital signs began to stabilize almost immediately. Dr. Grant returned to the room just as Karen was securing the tube. His face showed shock, then anger. What are you doing? He demanded. He was crashing. Massive internal bleeding. I had to place the drain, Karen explained, still focused on her patient. That's a procedure you're not authorized to perform in this hospital, Dr. Grant said, his voice tight. Step aside. Karen moved away as Dr. Grant examined her work. The doctor's expression changed as he noted the improvement in Sergeant Davis's vital signs. He said nothing more to Karen but called for additional assistance to prepare the Marine for emergency surgery. Karen continued her shift, helping with the other injured Marines. Word spread quickly among the staff about what she had done. Some nurses gave her approving glances, while others kept their distance, worried about the consequences of breaking protocol. By morning, all 6 Marines were stable. Sergeant Davis had made it through surgery and was in recovery. The surgeon who had operated on him, Dr. Pete Morgan, sought out Karen before she left. "That drain you placed saved his life," Dr. Morgan told her quietly. "If you had waited, he would have bled out before we got him to surgery." Karen nodded, grateful for the confirmation but aware that she had crossed a line. "Thanks for telling me. How is he doing?" "He'll recover fully. His unit is pretty important. They were on a special training mission when the accident happened. These aren't just any Marines." Karen clocked out at 8 a.m. and headed to the hospital cafeteria for breakfast before going home. She was exhausted but satisfied knowing all the patients had survived the night. As she sat with her tray, Hospital Director Wendy Jones approached her table. "Karen, I need to see you in my office before you leave," Director Jones said, her face serious. Karen's stomach tightened. She knew this was coming. She finished her breakfast without tasting it and made her way to the administrative wing. Director Jones was waiting with Dr. Grant and the hospital's legal advisor, Ben Harris. Their faces were grim. "Karen, we've reviewed the incident from last night," Director Jones began. "While we understand you believed you were acting in the patient's best interest, you performed a procedure you are not authorized to perform at this hospital." "I know," Karen said. "But Sergeant Davis was dying. There wasn't time to wait." Dr. Grant spoke up. "There are protocols in place for a reason. You undermined the chain of command and put the hospital at risk." The legal advisor nodded. "If anything had gone wrong, this hospital would be facing a serious lawsuit from the military. Your actions, regardless of outcome, violated your job description and hospital policy." Director Jones slid a document across the desk. "We've made the decision to terminate your employment effective immediately. This is unavoidable given the severity of the protocol breach." Karen felt like the air had been sucked from the room. 5 years of service, an impeccable record, and now this. But she didn't regret saving Sergeant Davis's life. "I understand," she said quietly, signing the termination papers. She cleaned out her locker as news of her dismissal spread through the hospital. Several colleagues came to express their support and dismay. Dr. Morgan, the surgeon, was particularly upset. "This is wrong," he told her. "You made the right call medically. I'll speak to the board." Karen appreciated his support but knew it wouldn't change anything. Hospital administration had made their decision. As she left the hospital carrying a box with her belongings, she passed the waiting room where several Marines from Sergeant Davis's unit sat. They didn't know she was the nurse who had saved their friend, or that she had just lost her job because of it. Karen drove home to her small apartment near the beach. She set the box down on her kitchen counter and looked out at the ocean. The morning sun sparkled on the water, a beautiful day that now felt empty. She had no regrets about saving the Marine's life, but the reality of losing her job was beginning to sink in. She made herself a cup of tea and sat on her small balcony. Tomorrow she would start looking for a new position. Her skills were in demand, but explaining why she left Bayside would be difficult. Still, she knew in her heart she had done the right thing. Karen couldn't have imagined that in less than 24 hours, her life would change in ways she never expected. Karen woke up late the next morning. She had finally fallen asleep at dawn after tossing and turning for hours. The reality of losing her job hit her hard as she made coffee in her quiet apartment. 5 years at Bayside Hospital gone because she chose to save a life instead of waiting for permission. She picked up her phone and saw dozens of text messages from coworkers. Most expressed shock and support. A few offered to help her find a new position. Dr. Morgan had texted 3 times, saying he was fighting for her with the hospital board but wasn't making progress. Karen sent brief thank you replies but felt empty inside. She had always defined herself by her work, first as a combat medic and then as an emergency nurse. Now she was unemployed with a termination on her record that would be difficult to explain to future employers. She opened her laptop and began updating her resume. Maybe smaller hospitals would be less strict about protocols. Or perhaps she could find work at a veterans clinic where her military experience would be valued. She needed to be practical. Her savings would only last a few months. Around noon, Karen decided to go for a walk on the beach. The fresh air might clear her head. She put on shorts and a t-shirt and headed out. The beach was quiet on this weekday, with just a few people, walking along the shore. Karen took off her sandals and let the cool water wash over her feet as she walked. What would she do now? Moving to another city might be necessary. The thought made her sad. She loved this small coastal town where she had settled after leaving the military. But staying meant she would constantly run into people from the hospital. After an hour of walking, Karen returned to her apartment. She had just stepped out of the shower when her phone rang. The screen showed an unfamiliar number with a Washington, D.C. area code. Probably a spam call, she thought, but answered anyway. "Hello, is this Karen Miller?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is Karen," she replied, wrapping a towel around her wet hair. "Ms. Miller, this is Linda Rogers from the White House Office of Presidential Affairs." Karen froze. The White House? This had to be a mistake or a prank. "I'm calling to inform you that the president would like to meet with you tomorrow regarding the incident at Bayside Naval Hospital." Karen sat down on the edge of her bed, her legs suddenly weak. "I'm sorry, but is this some kind of joke?" "No, Ms. Miller, this is not a joke," Linda replied firmly. "The president has been briefed about your actions that saved Sergeant Paul Davis. He would like to speak with you personally." Karen's mind raced. How had the president even heard about what happened? It must have something to do with Sergeant Davis's unit. He had mentioned they were part of a special operations team. "A car will arrive at your residence in 1 hour to bring you to the local airfield," Linda continued. "Please pack for an overnight stay in Washington. Do you have any questions?" Karen had 1,000 questions but couldn't form a single one. "No, yes, what should I wear to meet the president?" "Business attire is appropriate. The car will arrive in 1 hour. An aide will meet you at the airfield with more details." Linda ended the call, leaving Karen staring at her phone in disbelief. For a full minute, Karen didn't move. Then she jumped up and rushed to her closet. She owned exactly one business suit, navy blue and slightly outdated, which she had worn to job interviews. Would it be good enough to meet the president? It would have to be. She packed quickly, her hands shaking. With nerves, she threw clothes, toiletries, and her best shoes into a small suitcase. As she zipped it closed, her phone rang again. It was Dr. Morgan. "Karen, how are you holding up?" he asked. "You won't believe what just happened," she said, and told him about the call from the White House. There was a long pause before Dr. Morgan spoke. "Actually, I might know something about this. Sergeant Davis's commanding officer was here this morning asking questions about your dismissal. He seemed very upset about it." "What did you tell him?" Karen asked. "The truth. That you saved his Marine's life and got fired for it." Dr. Morgan sounded pleased with himself. "I didn't know he had that kind of pull, though." "The White House? That's incredible." Karen heard a car horn outside. She looked out her window and saw a black SUV with government plates parked in front of her building. "I have to go," she told Dr. Morgan. "The car is here." "Good luck, Karen. You deserve this," he said before hanging up. Karen grabbed her suitcase and took one last look around her apartment. 24 hours ago, she had been a nurse at Bayside Hospital. Now she was heading to Washington to meet the president. It felt like a dream. The driver, a young man in a dark suit, took her suitcase and opened the car door. "Ms. Miller, I'm Agent Chris Powell. I'll be escorting you to the airfield." The drive to the small military airfield took 30 minutes. Karen sat quietly in the back seat, trying to process what was happening. Agent Powell didn't offer conversation, and Karen was too nervous to ask questions. At the airfield, a small jet waited on the runway. Another suited agent met them and introduced himself as Scott Rivera from the White House staff. He was friendly, but professional, as he escorted Karen onto the plane. "We'll be in Washington in about 2 hours," Agent Rivera explained as they settled into comfortable leather seats. "After we land, you'll be taken to Blair House to freshen up before your meeting with the president." "Blair House?" Karen asked. "It's across from the White House, where we host important visitors," he explained. "The president wanted to make sure you were comfortable." The plane took off smoothly. Karen was served a light lunch, but she could barely eat. Agent Rivera briefed her on protocol for meeting the president, how to address him, where to stand, what to expect. May I ask why the president wants to see me? Karen finally asked. Agent Rivera smiled. I think he should explain that himself, but I can tell you that Sergeant Davis's unit has a direct line to the Oval Office. They handle some of our most sensitive operations. As they flew north, Karen watched the landscape change beneath them. Her life had changed so suddenly it was hard to keep up. Yesterday she had been fired. Today she was flying to Washington on a government jet. The plane landed at Andrews Air Force Base in the late afternoon. Another black SUV was waiting. Karen was driven through the streets of Washington, passing monuments and government buildings she had only seen in pictures. Blair House was an elegant historic building with American flags flying at the entrance. Inside, Karen was shown to a beautiful guest room with antique furniture and fresh flowers. A garment bag was laid out on the bed. The White House staff thought you might like options for this evening. Agent Rivera explained. These are for you to keep. Inside the bag were 3 dresses, each one more elegant than anything Karen had ever owned. There were also shoes, accessories, and a note from the First Lady welcoming her to Washington. Karen showered and changed into a simple but elegant blue dress from the garment bag. A stylist arrived to help with her hair and makeup. By early evening, Karen hardly recognized herself in the mirror. At 7 p.m., Agent Rivera returned. It's time, Ms. Miller. The president is waiting. They walked across Pennsylvania Avenue to the White House. Karen's heart pounded as they passed through security and entered the historic building. Paintings of past presidents lined the walls. Staff members nodded respectfully as they passed. Agent Rivera led her through the West Wing to a door guarded by a Secret Service agent. The Oval Office, Agent Rivera said quietly. Ready? Karen took a deep breath and nodded. She was about to meet the President of the United States because she had broken hospital rules to save a Marine. Nothing about this made sense, but she was ready to find out why she was here. The door opened, and Karen stepped into the most famous office in the world. The president stood behind his desk. But what shocked Karen most was seeing Sergeant Paul Davis sitting in a wheelchair beside the desk, very much alive and smiling at her. Next to him stood a man in a Marine uniform with a colonel's insignia and an older couple who looked to be Sergeant Davis's parents. Nurse Miller, the president said, walking around his desk with his hand extended. Welcome to the White House. We have a lot to talk about. Karen stood frozen for a moment as she took in the scene before her. The Oval Office was smaller than it appeared on television, but somehow more impressive. The president was smiling at her with his hand extended. Sergeant Davis sat in his wheelchair looking pale but very much alive. The older couple next to him, presumably his parents, watched her with tear-filled eyes. The Marine colonel stood tall and serious beside them. Karen stepped forward and shook the president's hand. Thank you for inviting me, Mr. President, she managed to say, her voice steadier than she expected. The honor is mine, Nurse Miller, the president replied. Please, have a seat. He gestured to a chair in the circle of couches and chairs at the center of the room. Karen sat down, smoothing her new blue dress nervously. The president took a seat across from her. Sergeant Davis's wheelchair was positioned next to him. Nurse Miller, do you know why you're here? The president asked. No, sir, I don't, Karen answered honestly. The president nodded to the Marine colonel. This is Colonel Frank Harris, commander of Sergeant Davis's unit. He brought this situation to my attention. Colonel Harris stepped forward. Ms. Miller, Sergeant Davis is part of a highly specialized unit that handles sensitive operations for our country. The training accident that brought him to your hospital was related to mission preparation. The colonel spoke precisely, his voice carrying the weight of authority. When I learned that the nurse who saved his life had been dismissed for her actions, I felt compelled to investigate. Sergeant Davis's mother suddenly stood up. May I speak? She asked the president, who nodded kindly. She moved to Karen and took both her hands. My name is Mary Davis. This is my husband, John. Paul is our only son. Her voice broke slightly. The doctors told us that without your quick action, Paul would have died before they could get him to surgery. You saved our boy's life. Thank you isn't enough, but thank you. Karen felt tears forming in her eyes. I was just doing my job, Mrs. Davis. A job you no longer have because of me. Sergeant Davis spoke up for the first time. His voice was weak but clear. That's not right. The president leaned forward. And that's why we're all here today. Colonel Harris brought this matter to my national security advisor, who brought it to me. I asked for a full review of the incident. He picked up a folder from the coffee table and opened it. According to the medical review conducted by military doctors, your assessment of Sergeant Davis's condition was correct. The procedure you performed was necessary and time-sensitive. Your military training qualified you to perform it, even if hospital regulations said otherwise. Karen felt a wave of relief wash over her. Having her medical decision validated by experts meant more to her than she expected. Hospital regulations serve an important purpose, the president continued, but they should never prevent qualified medical personnel from saving lives in true emergencies. He closed the folder. That's why I've asked the Secretary of Defense and the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to review protocols at all military and VA hospitals. Colonel Harris spoke again. Ms. Miller, your military service record shows you performed similar procedures under combat conditions. Your training and experience were precisely what Sergeant Davis needed at that critical moment. Karen looked at Sergeant Davis, who smiled weakly at her. How are you feeling? She asked, slipping naturally into her nurse's role. Better every day, thanks to you, he replied. The doctors say I'll make a full recovery. The president stood up and walked to his desk. He picked up a small blue box. Karen Miller, in recognition of your extraordinary action that saved the life of Sergeant Paul Davis, I am honored to present you with the Presidential Citizens Medal. Karen's mouth fell open in shock. The Presidential Citizens Medal was the second highest civilian award in the country. The president returned to stand in front of her. Please stand, he said gently. Karen rose on shaky legs. The president opened the box, revealing a silver medal hanging from a blue ribbon. This medal recognizes citizens who have performed exemplary deeds of service for their country or fellow citizens. He removed the medal from the box and placed the ribbon around Karen's neck. Your selfless action, putting a patient's life above your own professional security, exemplifies the highest ideals of service to others. Cameras flashed as the official White House photographer captured the moment. Karen couldn't believe this was happening. Just yesterday, she had been clearing out her locker at the hospital, her career seemingly over. Thank you, Mr. President, she said, touching the medal around her neck. I'm honored, but I was just doing what I thought was right. The best kind of courage, the president said with a smile. Now please sit down. There's more we need to discuss. Karen returned to her seat, feeling slightly dazed. The medal felt heavy against her chest. Ms. Miller, your dismissal from Bayside Naval Hospital has raised important questions about medical protocols in emergency situations, the president explained. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs is establishing a new initiative to review and improve these protocols. We would like you to be part of this effort. Colonel Harris took over. We're calling it the Military Medical Response Initiative. Its purpose will be to establish better guidelines for emergency medical situations, particularly in military and VA facilities. Your experience as both a combat medic and a civilian nurse makes you uniquely qualified to contribute to this work. Karen tried to process what she was hearing. Are you offering me a job? The president nodded. A consultant position with the Department of Veterans Affairs, working directly with the Secretary on this initiative. You would help develop new protocols and training programs for medical personnel in military and VA facilities. This is a position with real impact, Ms. Miller, Colonel Harris added. The protocols you help develop could save countless lives in the future. Karen felt overwhelmed. From fired to a White House job offer in 24 hours. It seemed impossible. I don't know what to say. You don't need to decide immediately, the president assured her. Take some time to consider the offer. You'll be staying at Blair House tonight. Tomorrow morning, you'll meet with the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to discuss the details. Sergeant Davis spoke up again. Ms. Miller, my unit works on classified missions. We depend on quick, correct medical decisions when things go wrong. What you did, trusting your training and acting decisively, That's exactly what we need more of in military medicine. His father, John Davis, who had been quiet until now, added, "Our son has served this country for 10 years. In all that time, we've worried about losing him. We never thought a hospital's rules would be what nearly took him from us. What you did matters." Karen looked around the room at these people who had brought her to the White House to honor her for an action that had cost her job. She felt a sense of purpose returning, something she had lost when she was dismissed from the hospital. "I would be honored to help with the initiative," she said finally. The president smiled. "Excellent. We'll set up the meeting with the secretary for tomorrow morning. In the meantime, I believe Sergeant Davis and his parents would like to speak with you privately." The president stood, signaling the end of the official meeting. He shook Karen's hand once more. "What you did matters, Ms. Miller. Never doubt that." As the president left the room with Colonel Harris, Karen found herself alone with Sergeant Davis and his parents. Mary Davis immediately embraced her in a tight hug. "We have so much to thank you for," she said through happy tears. Karen looked at Sergeant Davis, who was watching her with gratitude in his eyes. In that moment, she knew she had made the right decision in that hospital room, regardless of the consequences. Some rules were meant to be broken when lives were at stake. And now, instead of ending her career, that decision had opened a door to something new, a chance to make changes that could help many more patients in the future. After the meeting in the Oval Office, Karen spent another hour with Sergeant Davis and his parents. They sat in a small, comfortable room near the Oval Office, talking as if they had known each other for years instead of hours. Paul Davis told Karen about his 10 years in the Marines and his Special Operations Unit, sharing what he could without touching on classified details. His parents spoke about their worry each time he was deployed, and their overwhelming relief when Karen's quick action saved his life. "When I woke up after surgery," Paul said, "the first thing I asked was who had helped me in the emergency room. The doctor told me about you and what you did. Then yesterday, I heard you'd been fired. Because of it." He shook his head in disbelief. "I called my commanding officer right away." Mary Davis reached over and squeezed Karen's hand. "Paul told us what happened, and we couldn't believe it. John and I called everyone we knew who might help. We never expected it to reach the president so quickly." Karen was touched by their efforts. "I still can't believe any of this is happening," she admitted. "Yesterday I was updating my resume, worried about finding a new job. And now you'll be helping create new medical protocols that could save many lives," John Davis said with satisfaction. "Sometimes things work out in ways we don't expect." Eventually, Agent Rivera returned to escort Karen back to Blair House. It was late evening by then, and Karen was exhausted from the emotional day. As they walked across Pennsylvania Avenue, she asked the question that had been on her mind. How did Colonel Harris get a meeting with the president so quickly? Even for an elite unit, that seems unusual. Agent Rivera smiled slightly. "Sergeant Davis's unit has a direct line to the president because of the nature of their work. When Colonel Harris heard what happened to you, he called the National Security Advisor, who immediately brought it to the president's attention." Karen was silent for a moment, processing this information. "The president seems very interested in this situation for it to be handled so quickly. The president has a son in the military," Agent Rivera explained. "He takes a personal interest in the welfare of service members and veterans. When he heard about a nurse being fired for saving a Marine's life, he wanted to address it immediately." At Blair House, Karen was shown to her room again. She called Dr. Morgan to update him on the incredible turn of events. "I knew you did the right thing medically," Dr. Morgan said when she told him about the medal and job offer. "But I never imagined it would lead to this. The hospital administration is going to regret their decision when this becomes public." "I'm not interested in making them look bad," Karen said. "I just want to help make sure other medical professionals aren't put in the same position I was." After they hung up, Karen stepped out onto the small balcony attached to her room. The White House was lit up across the street, glowing in the darkness. Just 24 hours earlier, she had been standing on her apartment balcony, wondering how she would rebuild her career. Now she wore the Presidential Citizens Medal and had been offered a position that could influence medical care for service members across the country. Karen slept better that night than she had in weeks. In the morning, she was served breakfast. in a small dining room at Blair House. A newspaper had been placed beside her plate. She nearly choked on her coffee when she saw the front page. There was a photo of her receiving the medal from the president with the headline, "Nurse Fired for Saving Marine Honored by President." After breakfast, Agent Rivera escorted her to the Department of Veterans Affairs for her meeting with the secretary. The large government building was impressive, with its marble columns and busy hallways filled with people working on veterans' issues. The Secretary of Veterans Affairs welcomed Karen warmly in a wood-paneled conference room. He was a tall man with silver hair and a military bearing. "Ms. Miller, it's an honor to meet you. The President spoke highly of you." "Thank you, Mr. Secretary," Karen replied, still a bit overwhelmed by all the attention. "Please sit down. We have much to discuss about the Military Medical Response Initiative." For the next 2 hours, the Secretary outlined the initiative and the role he hoped Karen would play. The goal was to review and improve emergency medical protocols in military and VA facilities nationwide. Karen would work with a team of medical and military experts to develop new guidelines that balanced necessary protocols with the need for medical professionals to use their training and judgment in critical situations. "Your background makes you uniquely qualified for this work," the Secretary explained. "You've been on both sides, as a military medic who had to make split-second decisions in combat and as a civilian nurse working within hospital regulations." Karen leaned forward, feeling excited about the possibilities. "I'd like to focus on bridging that gap, helping military medical personnel transition to civilian healthcare settings without losing their ability to act decisively in emergencies." The Secretary nodded. "Exactly what we need. Too often, we lose valuable skills and experience because of rigid systems that don't recognize different types of training." By the end of the meeting, Karen had accepted the position. She would start in 2 weeks, with an office at the VA headquarters in Washington. The salary was generous, more than she had made as a nurse. She would also travel to military and VA hospitals around the country to study their procedures and train staff on the new protocols once they were developed. "We'll arrange temporary housing for you while you look for a permanent place in Washington," the Secretary told her. "And of course, we'll cover your relocation expenses from California." It was a lot to take in. Karen had never planned to leave her coastal town or her job at Bayside Hospital. But this opportunity felt right in a way she couldn't explain. After the meeting, Karen was taken to lunch at a restaurant near the White House. To her surprise, Colonel Harris joined her. "I wanted to thank you personally," he said as they sat down. "Sergeant Davis is not just one of my men. He's one of our best, and the work he does is vital to national security." Karen sipped her water, unsure how to respond to the colonel's intensity. "I was just doing my job." "No," Colonel Harris said firmly. "You were doing more than your job. You were using your full training and experience to save a life, regardless of the personal consequences. That's what we need more of in this country." He paused as the waiter brought their food. "The President believes this initiative could change how we approach medical care for service members and veterans. He's giving it his full support." "It all happened so fast," Karen admitted. 2 days ago, I was a nurse in a small hospital. Now I'm moving to Washington to work on a presidential initiative." Colonel Harris smiled for the first time. Sometimes life changes in an instant. The question is what we do with those changes. They talked more about the initiative during lunch. Colonel Harris had ideas about how emergency protocols could be improved for special operations units like his. Karen found herself taking mental notes, already thinking about how these suggestions could be incorporated into the new guidelines. After lunch, Karen was driven back to Blair House to collect her belongings. Her return flight to California was scheduled for that afternoon. She would have 2 weeks to pack up her apartment and say goodbye to her friends before returning to Washington to start her new job. As she gathered her things, Karen looked at the medal now tucked carefully in its blue box. The simple act of trusting her training and experience to save a patient had changed the course of her life. She had lost her job but found a new purpose, one that might help many more patients and medical professionals in the future. Karen took one last look around the elegant guest room, then picked up her suitcase. She was ready to go home and prepare for her new life in Washington. As she walked down the stairs, she felt a sense of excitement about what lay ahead. The path hadn't been what she expected, but it was leading somewhere important. Agent Rivera was waiting to drive her to the airport. "All set, Ms. Miller?" Karen nodded. "Yes, I'm ready." She stepped outside into the bright Washington sunshine, leaving Blair House behind, but carrying with her a new sense of purpose and the knowledge that sometimes doing the right thing, even when it's difficult, can lead to unexpected opportunities. 3 months had passed since Karen's unexpected visit to the White House. She now lived in a small but comfortable apartment in Washington, D.C., just a short subway ride from her office at the Department of Veterans Affairs. Her life had changed completely from her days as an emergency room nurse at Bayside Naval Hospital. Karen's work with the Military Medical Response Initiative had started quickly. Within her first week, she was meeting with doctors, nurses, and administrators from military and VA hospitals across the country. They formed a committee to review existing medical protocols and identify problems that needed fixing. "The issue isn't just about rules," Karen explained during one meeting. "It's about recognizing different types of training and experience. A combat medic might have skills that aren't officially recognized in a civilian hospital setting." Her personal story resonated with many medical professionals who had faced similar conflicts between protocol and patient needs. Letters and emails poured in from nurses and doctors sharing their experiences. Each story helped shape the new guidelines Karen and her team were developing. Today marked an important milestone. Karen was returning to Bayside Naval Hospital for the first time since her dismissal. The hospital had been selected as the first location to implement the new emergency response protocols developed by her team. It wasn't a coincidence. The president himself had suggested starting where Karen's story began. Karen felt nervous as her government car approached the familiar building. She wore a navy blue suit, her Presidential Citizen's Medal pin on her lapel, and carried a briefcase filled with materials for the presentation. She was no longer just Nurse Miller. Now she was Karen Miller, Special Advisor to the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. Dr. Morgan was waiting for her at the hospital entrance. His face broke into a wide smile when he saw her. "Karen, you look different. Washington agrees with you." Karen hugged her former colleague. "It's good to see you, Dr. Morgan. How have things been here?" "Different since you left. Your story made quite an impact. The newspaper articles, the TV interviews. It forced some changes even before your official visit today." News of Karen's White House honor and new position had spread quickly after that first newspaper article. She had given several interviews about the initiative, always emphasizing that her goal wasn't to eliminate protocols but to improve them. Dr. Morgan lowered his voice. "Director Jones resigned last month. The new director is much more open to the changes you're proposing." Karen nodded but didn't comment. She had never wanted anyone to lose their job over what happened. Her focus was on improving the system, not punishing individuals. They walked through the familiar hospital corridors toward the conference room. Staff members stopped to stare or smile as she passed. Some offered quiet congratulations or words of support. Karen felt strange being back, part visitor, part returning hero. The conference room was packed with hospital staff, doctors, nurses, administrators, and even some of the hospital board members. At the front of the room stood Director Elizabeth Cooper, who had replaced Director Jones. She was a younger woman with a reputation for progressive thinking in healthcare administration. "Ms. Miller, welcome back to Bayside," Director Cooper said, extending her hand. "We're honored to be the first hospital to implement the new protocols." Karen shook her hand. "Thank you for your willingness to be part of this important change." As Karen set up her presentation, she noticed Dr. Grant slip into the back of the room. He had been the attending physician the night she saved Sergeant Davis. Their eyes met briefly before he looked away. Karen felt no anger toward him. They had both been caught in a flawed system. Director Cooper called the meeting to order and introduced Karen. Many of you know Karen Miller's story. What began as a difficult situation has led to positive change for medical professionals across the country. We're fortunate to have her here today to introduce the new emergency response protocols that will be implemented at Bayside starting next month. Karen stepped to the podium, feeling a mix of emotions: nervousness, pride, and a sense of things coming full circle. Thank you, Director Cooper. 3 months ago, I was a nurse in this hospital. Today, I'm here representing the Military Medical Response Initiative, a presidential program designed to improve emergency medical care for service members and veterans. She looked around the room at her former colleagues. What happened to me, being dismissed for using my combat medical training to save a patient's life, highlighted a problem in our healthcare system. The new protocols we've developed aim to solve that problem. For the next hour, Karen explained the changes. The new system would create clear pathways for recognizing military medical training in civilian settings. It established guidelines for emergency situations when waiting for approval could endanger a patient's life. Most importantly, it protected medical professionals who made difficult decisions in those critical moments. These protocols have been reviewed and approved by medical and legal experts, Karen concluded. They maintain necessary oversight while allowing trained professionals to use their full skills in emergencies. The President believes these changes will save lives, and I do too. When she finished her presentation, the room erupted in applause. Many staff members who had worked with Karen seemed genuinely happy to see her succeeding in her new role. Director Cooper announced that training on the new protocols would begin the following week. After the formal meeting, Karen was surprised when Dr. Grant approached her. "Ms. Miller," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. That night with Sergeant Davis, you made the right call. I was too concerned about protocol and not enough about the patient." Karen appreciated his honesty. "We were both working within a flawed system, Dr. Grant. These new protocols should make those situations easier to navigate in the future." He nodded and offered his hand. "Congratulations on your new position. It suits you." As the meeting broke up, Karen was about to leave when she noticed a group of people entering the conference room. Her heart jumped when she recognized Sergeant Paul Davis, now out of his wheelchair and walking with just a slight limp. Behind him were his parents, Mary and John and Colonel Harris. "Surprise!" Mary called out, hurrying forward to hug Karen. "We couldn't miss your first official visit." Sergeant Davis smiled as he approached. "Looking good, Ms. Miller. Washington has turned you into a proper government official." Karen laughed. "Hardly. I'm still a nurse at heart." She was genuinely happy to see him on his feet. "You're looking much better than the last time I saw you here." "Thanks to you," he said simply. "I'm back on limited duty now. Should be cleared for full duty in another month." Colonel Harris stepped forward. "The President sends his regards. He's very pleased with the progress of the initiative. Your work is already making an impact." After catching up with the Davis family, Karen took them on a tour of the hospital. It felt strange walking through the halls as a visitor rather than an employee. They stopped by the emergency room where everything had started. The staff welcomed Sergeant Davis like a celebrity, eager to see the Marine whose case had led to such significant changes. Later, Karen had lunch with the Davis family and Colonel Harris in the hospital cafeteria. As they ate, Mary asked, "Do you ever miss being a nurse, Karen? Your new job seems very different." Karen considered the question. "I do miss the direct patient care sometimes, but this work could help thousands of patients by improving the system, and I'm still using my nursing experience every day, just in a different way." Colonel Harris nodded approvingly. "The best people to change systems are those who've worked within them. You understand both sides, the need for protocols and the reality of emergency situations." After lunch, it was time for Karen to head back to Washington. She had another presentation the next day at Walter Reed Medical Center. As they walked to her car, Sergeant Davis handed her a small box. "From my unit," he explained, "a token of our appreciation." Inside was a custom-made coin, similar to the challenge coins military units often created. One side showed the medical caduceus symbol. The other side was engraved with the words, "Sometimes saving a life means breaking the rules." Karen felt tears form in her eyes as she read it. "Thank you. This means a lot to me." As her car pulled away from Bayside Naval Hospital, Karen reflected on the journey of the past 3 months. A split-second decision to save a patient's life had cost Her a job, but opened the door to something bigger, a chance to change the system itself. She had lost a position but found a purpose. The coin Sergeant Davis had given her rested in her hand. Sometimes saving a life means breaking the rules. Those words captured her story perfectly. What had begun as a personal and professional crisis had transformed into an opportunity to make a difference for countless medical professionals and the patients they served. The car turned onto the highway toward the airport. Karen put the coin carefully in her pocket, next to her Presidential Citizen's Medal pin. Her new life was waiting in Washington, but she would always remember where this journey began, in an emergency room where she chose to trust her training and save a life, regardless of the consequences.